The Zelda series has a magical way of telling the game's story, usually by giving us brief details on the main story and expecting Link to explore and engage in social activity to understand the rest. Breath of the Wild is a perfect example of this, starting with the old man explaining the main events of the game before Link setting out to experience the rest of Hyrule on his own. One other instance of this can be related to the Yiga clan. The Yiga clan, being loyal servants to Ganon, will try to kill Link when caught off guard. Very little is directly told to Link about the Yiga, which is why exploration and social activity is so important. Engaging with NPCs and reading notes and signs are some of the best ways to learn the game's backstory. King Dorothan is another great example. By reading the Zora Stone monuments on the way to Zora's domain, they will explain some of his coolest moments, like how he defended Zora's domain from a roaming stalker guardian and threw it into a nearby valley, which left him with a scar on his head. The game doesn't directly tell the player this, it's down to the player to find this information, and that's what makes the storytelling of Zelda so great. Majora's Mask also does a great job of this. Yes, the time restraints and giant creepy moon edging closer and closer to Clocktown adds significant stress to the player, but a lot of the pressure comes from interacting with the inhabitants of Termina. The game doesn't forcefully tell you how these people feel, it's down to us to absorb the information from the citizens of Termina. You could choose to ignore almost every person in the game, and you would learn only a small amount of what's really going on in the world. Or you could choose to speak to everyone and learn that the people in Termina are suffering with very real problems and emotions. Anxiety, depression, stress, and even loneliness plague the dark world of Termina. The very emotions of Eiji Aonuma roam inside Majora's Mask. The pressure of making the game in a 1-year time frame must have been awful for him. He even went as far as to say he didn't want to remake the game for the 3DS. It's easy to see how his emotions slipped into the game and how the Zelda series took a much different approach after Majora's Mask. Wind Waker was a much lighter game, not only visually but also story-wise. Twilight Princess tried to dip into the darker side of Zelda, but in my opinion wasn't even close to the wickedness of Majora's Mask. Skyward Sword pulled the game back to the light side, and Breath of the Wild continued this trend. Breath of the Wild 2 is confirmed as being darker than the original, with Aonuma stating this himself. But what could darker mean? Could it mean dark like Twilight Princess? Or dark like Majora's Mask? I think it's likely we could see the developers take inspiration from Majora over Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess has its dark moments, but it's no more than a person with a sheet over his head impersonating a ghost. Majora, on the other hand, is a real ghost. There is no way, and by no way I mean 100% chance, that Breath of the Wild 2 or any future Zelda game will ever match Majora in terms of its dark setting. But it's possible that Breath of the Wild 2 could come in at second place, rising above Twilight Princess. If Breath of the Wild 2 is done right, and in a similar way as Majora, it could truly be a terrifying game. In order to understand how Breath of the Wild 2 could capitalise on the darkest setting which it seeks, we need to look at some of the things that made Majora so dark. The main villain is a pretty good place to start. We know that the villain is the mask, and the mask is called Majora. We also know that the mask was created by a tribe during a dark hexing ritual. Hexing in general is a pretty creepy subject. The word hex implies unpleasant or harmful things to happen to people or their stuff. The fact that Majora was created through witchcraft is incredibly dark for the Zelda series. Not only is Majora visually terrifying, but his acts are also very demonic, using Skull Kid as his host to do terrible things throughout Termina. The terrible acts in which he does affect every single living thing in the world, and his final plan is to have the moon crash into Termina, which would result in the whole population being killed. It's possible that Breath of the Wild 2 will be heavily focused on the humanoid form of Ganon, Ganondorf. Well, what do we actually know of Ganondorf? Visually, he is no more terrifying than any human in Hyrule. He has a somewhat evil appeal to him, sure, but scary? Not really. Having two giant orange standstill eyes always watching is way more terrifying than Ganondorf will ever be. I think it's important to change the way Ganondorf looks in Breath of the Wild 2. Having him stay in a mummified state for the whole game would certainly be a win here, but it's unlikely. He will more than likely gain his full human form and look similar to how he has always looked. But it's not just the appearance that makes Majora so terrifying. It's also his actions and his evil intentions. Ganondorf is by no means a saint. He has indulged in many evil acts during his many incarnations, almost rendering the Zora race extinct by freezing the water in Zora's domain. He makes an example out of the Goron race by trapping them in cells within the Fire Temple while they wait to be eaten, kidnapping innocent children and holding them at the Forsaken Fortress, taking over Hyrule, abusing Zant and the Twilight People, and many, many more. There is no doubt that Ganondorf is an evil man, but is he as evil as Majora? I wouldn't say so. Ganondorf does some very evil things, but most are justifiable to Ganondorf. Ganondorf was born with the Gerudo warriors in a desolate wasteland known as Gerudo Desert, with very little food or resources. Ganondorf wanted to help his people by ruling Hyrule and giving them what they needed. He stole the Triforce to give him ultimate power so that he could solidify his position in ruling the world. He made examples out of the many races to stop them from rising up against him. He kidnapped children with pointed ears because he was looking for Princess Zelda. It's clear that many of his evil acts he commits is to help his people and help him remain in power of the world. Majora has but one purpose: consume everything. Breath of the Wild 2 needs to show us the evil deeds Ganondorf is capable of, and the consequences if he isn't stopped. The original Breath of the Wild really did fail to capture the evilness of Ganon, so Breath of the Wild 2 really needs to express the wicked image that Majora did so well. What springs to mind most about Majora's Mask being so dark is the many people that inhabit Termina. Like we mentioned earlier, these people are real people with real emotions. They struggle with day-to-day problems. A mugging takes place in Clocktown, and if Link doesn't intervene, the mugger will slip past the guard and get away with the crime he has committed. The mayor can be seen in a distressed state while the people and guards argue over the moon. He is completely lost on what the right decision is for his people. Anju is missing her loved one, Kafei. Kafei is also the mayor's son. Missing people, politics, and even petty crimes take place throughout Termina. All things that take place in Majora's Mask are so relatable because we see the same events happen in our own world. Breath of the Wild 2 should focus heavily on interesting side characters that are suffering with serious problems. We need characters that we can remember long after the game is finished. Characters that need saving and need closure. This is something Breath of the Wild lacked. I can't really remember anyone that generally needed my help, whereas Majora's Mask I can remember pretty much all of them, as the problems they had weren't just fetch quests for rupees that had little meaning. One last subject I want to touch on is the overall atmosphere of Majora's Mask and how Breath of the Wild 2 could benefit from it. Majora's Mask did a fantastic job of making us feel lonely, whether we are in the snowy Goron Mountains or in the vastly populated Clocktown. The game will always make you feel alone, and that's because we are. Link is just a child in a very strange world with no real friends or familiar places. The start of the game, we are trapped in the form of a Deku, a terrifying scenario for a child, never knowing if you'll be free or trapped forever. But the game only gets worse when you see the chaos of Skull Kid's actions. Mysterious people and mysterious places help to add tension and make for the perfect horror show. Breath of the Wild 2 isn't claiming to be Majora's Mask, and it never will be, but that doesn't mean it can't take some of the best features that Majora's Mask had and utilise them. Caring for the people of Hyrule should be a priority when creating side quests. If we don't care for the people we help, then why would we care about completing the side quest? I never really cared for stopping Ganon in Breath of the Wild, but I truly wanted to put an end to Majora. Knowing and seeing the horrible things he had done made me want justice for the people of Termina. This is something Breath of the Wild 2 could improve on. I want to hate Ganondorf for his horrid actions and put an end to him once and for all. I have no doubt that Breath of the Wild 2 will be a fantastic game, and I'm by no means saying that Breath of the Wild 2 should be a clone of Majora's Mask. I'm just suggesting things that could help the game feel a little darker. Of course, this video is based on my own opinions. If you disagree, then that's fine. But I would love to hear your thoughts on my ideas, and I would also love to hear what you think could help Breath of the Wild 2 to be a darker game in the comments below. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed, then leave a like and subscribe for more Zelda content. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, it really does help out a bunch and means so much to me. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you next time.